The war had lasted so long that nobody could remember how or why it began. For generations, it was all that humanity had known, the backdrop to every life, the undercurrent of every dream. The endless war had reshaped not just Earth, but the galaxy itself, burning entire systems to ash and scattering human colonies to the farthest reaches of space. The enemy, the Zervans, were relentless, a highly advanced insectoid race. Their cold, calculating intellect was matched only by their vast numbers. They were the perfect conquerors, sweeping through galaxies and enslaving entire species with their biotechnology and hive mind. Against them, most races had crumbled, but humans were different. Humans fought back, and they kept fighting, long past the point where others would have surrendered. That's what made them unique. Humanity, yeah. Private Marcus Kane had never known a world without the war. Born on a battleship and trained from the age of 6 to fight, he had lived his whole life in the shadow of the conflict. He was now part of the 38th Infantry Division, deployed on the planet of Tarkomenes 9, a desert wasteland on the outer edge of human-controlled space. The Zervans were pushing again, a new offensive that threatened to break through the last defensive line between them and Earth itself. The air was thick, with the hum of gunships overhead and the distant thunder of artillery. Kane and his squad crouched behind a ridge, scanning the horizon through the heat haze. The sun beat down relentlessly, baking the dry sand beneath their feet. "Visual on enemy," muttered Sergeant Harper, their squad leader. She gestured toward a cloud of dust in the distance. Kane squinted, his enhanced optics zooming in. Through the swirling sand, he could see hundreds of Zervans, moving like a tide of shadows across the landscape. Their chitinous bodies gleamed under the sun, sharp mandibles clicking in unison, and their eyes glowed an eerie green. "Ada," Harper asked. 15 minutes, tops, Kane replied. "They'll be on us soon." The squad was outnumbered. That was the norm these days. Kane's heart pounded, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. He clenched his gauntleted fists, feeling the servos in his armor hum to life. His plasma rifle felt solid in his hands, its cold metal reassuring. They might be outnumbered, but they were human, and humans didn't go down easily. "Harper Keter comes. Command, this is Echo Squad. We have a large servant force inbound, approximately 1 click east of our position, requesting reinforcements." The reply came back through static. "Negative. Echo Squad, all units are engaged. Hold your position. Reinforcements at unknown." Harper cursed under her breath and turned to the squad. "You heard them. We hold the line." Kane's grip tightened on his rifle. "How long are we supposed to hold?" Harper met his gaze, her eyes cold and hard. "As long as it takes." The Zervans came like a storm, the ground shaking under the force of their advance. Echo Squad opened fire, plasma bolts and railgun rounds streaking through the air, cutting down the first wave of insectoid soldiers. Kane's rifle kicked in his hands as he unleashed burst after burst of fire. But for every Zervan that fell, 2 more took his place. They were swarming now, closing in from all sides, their numbers overwhelming. Harper shouted orders, directing the squad's fire, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. Kane switched to his sidearm as the enemy came within melee range. He fired point blank into the face of a Zervan, its mandibles snapping inches from his head. The creature fell, and Kane barely had time to reload before another was on him. One of the soldiers, Lance Corporal Jenkins, screamed as a Zervan impaled him with a spear-like appendage. The rest of the squad was forced to retreat, regrouping behind a rocky outcrop. Kane's breath was ragged, sweat pouring down his face as he ducked behind cover, plasma bolts whizzing past his head. "We can't hold them off much longer," one of the soldiers yelled. Kane glanced at Harper. She was silent for a moment, her jaw clenched. Then, she made her decision. "We hold," she said, her voice steely. "No retreat. We die here, or they do." It was madness, but it was also the human way. No surrender, no retreat. Kane nodded grimly, stepping out from cover and unleashing everything he had. His rifle overheated, so he threw it down and drew his combat knife, charging into the fray with a primal roar. The Zervans closed in, but Kane didn't care. He fought like a cornered animal, slashing and stabbing, every movement fueled by pure rage and adrenaline. The others followed his lead, fighting with a desperation that only humans seemed to possess, even as the servants overwhelmed them, even as their armor was torn apart and their bodies were broken. They kept fighting. And then, just as it seemed like the end, a deafening roar filled the sky. Kane looked up, barely able to believe his eyes. Human gunships, dozens of them, screaming down from the heavens. Reinforcements had arrived. The battlefield was silent now, save for the crackle of flames and the faint hum of distant gunships patrolling overhead. The servant bodies lay scattered, broken and charred. Echo Squad had been reduced to 5 Kane, Sergeant Harper, and 3 others who were barely standing, but they were alive. That alone felt like a victory. Kane leaned against a boulder, wiping the blood from his forehead. His armor was battered, barely functional, and his knife was caked in the black ichor of the servants. He glanced at Harper, who was staring out at the horizon, her face expressionless. Reinforcements took their sweet time, he muttered, trying to catch his breath. Harper gave a grim nod. We've got more than our share of that lately. Command stretched thin. It's getting worse. She didn't need to say it. They all knew the truth. The war wasn't going well. For centuries, humanity had been holding its own, fighting tooth and nail to keep the servants from overwhelming them. But now it felt like the tide was shifting. More worlds were falling, more systems lost, and each time, humanity's resources were stretched thinner. The reinforcements that had saved them today were a reminder of just how fragile their situation was. They were scraping by, barely managing to hold the line. Sergeant, a voice crackled through Harper's comm. This is command. We've secured the sector. Reinforcements are mopping up the remaining servant forces. You're being extracted for debriefing and reassignment. Stand by for pickup. Harper acknowledged the transmission with a curt nod and turned to her squad. You heard them? We're heading back to base. Kane exchanged a glance with the others. Base, he thought bitterly. It would be another station, another cold, sterile environment where they'd be briefed on the next suicide mission. As the dust settled and the gunships descended to collect them, Kane couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. This endless war had drained every ounce of hope from him long ago, but something deeper, primal fire still burned. As long as there was breath in his lungs, he would fight. That was what it meant to be human. The gunship's doors slid open, and Kane stepped inside, feeling the familiar shudder of the craft as it lifted off the ground. He watched the battlefield disappear beneath them, a sea of scorched earth and the wreckage of war. But just as he thought they were in the clear, the ship jolted violently, alarms blaring through the cabin. Brace, the pilot shouted over the comms. Kane grabbed onto the nearest support beam as the gunship twisted sharply to the side, nearly throwing him off his feet. Outside the windows, he saw flashes of light energy blasts streaking through the sky. Incoming, Harper shouted. Servant interceptors. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. The servants had launched an aerial counterattack. Where the hell is our escort? Kane growled, holding on as the gunship was hit again, this time harder. They're pinned down, the pilot yelled back. We're sitting ducks out here. Kane's heart raced. They were too far from the ground to jump, and too damaged to fight back. It felt like a death sentence. As the ship took another hit, he could see the sky outside burning with explosions. In the chaos, Harper's voice cut through, steady and focused. Get to the gun ports. We're not going down without a fight. Kane didn't hesitate. He rushed to the nearest turret, slamming his hands onto the controls and bringing the targeting systems online. The servant interceptors darted through the sky like predators, sleek and agile. He squeezed the trigger, sending a volley of plasma fire toward the nearest one. The turret hummed as boats streaked through the air, and Kane's shots found their mark. One of the interceptors exploded in a ball of green flame, but more were circling, closing in fast. They're everywhere, one of the other soldiers shouted as they fired wildly, trying to keep the enemy at bay. The gunship shook again, sparks flying as another blast tore through its hull. Kane fired until his turret overheated, then slammed his fist against it in frustration. There were too many of them. Suddenly, the comms crackled to life again. This is Black Spear Squadron. We're moving in to assist. Hang tight. Kane's heart leapt at the sound of the familiar voice. Black Spear was one of humanity's elite fighter squadrons, the best of the best. Within seconds, a squadron of human fighters streaked across the sky, engaging the Zervan interceptors with ruthless precision. Explosions lit up the heavens as the tide turned once more, this time in humanity's favor. In minutes, the interceptors were gone, reduced to flaming wreckage tumbling toward the ground. Kane slumped in his seat, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Black Spear, this is Echo Squad, Harper said through the comms. We owe you one. The reply came back with a hint of humor. Just doing our job, Echo. Safe travels. As the gunship finally stabilized, Kane allowed himself a moment of relief. They were safe, for now. Hours later, they arrived at the outpost on Serenisa-4, a heavily fortified human base located in a system near the front lines. The atmosphere inside was tense, soldiers moving with purpose, armored vehicles rumbling through the corridors. Kane could feel the weight of the war here more than ever. After a brief medical check and a round of debriefing, they were finally given a few hours to rest. Kane found himself in the mess hall, staring into a cup of something that was supposed to resemble coffee. He barely noticed as Harper sat down across from him, her own drink in hand. Long day, she said simply. Kane gave a tired nod. You could say that. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the war hanging between them. Finally, Kane spoke again. Do you ever think about it? He asked, his voice low. The end of this, the end of the war? Harper stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she shook her head. No, she said quietly. I don't think there is an end. Her words hung in the air like a cold truth. And Kane realized, deep down, that she was right.